Long before there were lawyers, printers, or digital signatures, a business deal was sealed with nothing more than a steady look and a firm handshake. Two men would stand in a marketplace, agree on a price for a herd of sheep, and look each other in the eye to say, "It is a deal." In those days, your word was not just a vibration in the air, it was the entire foundation of your family's reputation and your survival. If a man broke his word, he didn't just lose a customer, he lost his place in the community, and no one would ever trade with him again. Imagine a traveler who promised to return in a year to pay a debt, even though there was no written record and no one to enforce it. He could have easily stayed in a far-off city and kept the money, and no one would have ever found him. But he chose to travel for 3 months through dangerous mountains and heavy rain, just to deliver the payment on the exact day he promised. He didn't do it because he was afraid of a lawsuit. He did it because he understood that his word was the only thing he truly owned. We live in a modern world where people make promises they never intend to keep, hidden behind layers of fine print and maybe and I'll try. We have become cheap with our language, using words to cover our tracks instead of building a path for others to follow. But the real and direct power of a human being is still measured by the gap between what they say and what they do. When you treat your word like a sacred contract, you create a level of trust that acts like a superpower in a world of liars. You don't need a 1,000-page document to prove you're a person of integrity. You just need to be someone whose yes means yes. Start treating every sentence you speak as if it were carved in stone, and watch how people begin to rely on you like a solid rock. The most valuable currency in the world isn't gold or data. It is the simple, unshakable fact that you do what you say you will do. In a small village, there was a man named Elias who was famous for his long, winding explanations. If he promised to fix a neighbor's roof and didn't show up, he would spend an hour talking about the rain, his tools, and his sudden headache. He never simply said, "I forgot" or "I was lazy." He always wrapped his failures in a thick blanket of maybe and I would have, but. Jesus once stood on a hillside and taught a radical, direct way to speak. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Elias thought this was too simple, believing that a clever person needs many words to protect their image in front of others. But as the years went by, people stopped listening to Elias before he even finished his first sentence. They realized that a man who uses 1,000 words to explain a no is usually trying to hide a lie. Eventually, when Elias actually needed help and promised to pay it back, no one in the village would look him in the eye. His yes had become a hollow sound, and his no was hidden under so many layers of excuses that it had no weight at all. In the real world, a person who says "I can't do it" is respected, while the person who says "I'll try my best" but never shows up is avoided. The most efficient communication on earth is the honest, naked truth that doesn't need a lawyer to translate it. When you strip away the well, the perhaps, and the circumstances, you are left with the skeleton of your character. Your reputation is not built on your intentions or your elaborate stories. It is built on the simple fact that you do what you said you would. If you want people to trust you, stop decorating your speech and start being direct and real with every person you meet. A short, honest answer is a sign of a strong soul, while a long excuse is just the sound of a crumbling foundation. There was a young woman who loved to share secrets about her friends, believing that her words were just harmless vibrations in the air. One afternoon, she told a story about a shopkeeper that wasn't entirely true, and by sunset the whole town was whispering about it. The shopkeeper lost his customers, his children were teased at school, and his honest name was dragged through the mud of the marketplace. When the woman saw the pain she had caused, she felt a sudden weight of regret, and went to an old sage to ask how to fix it. The sage told her to take a feather pillow, rip it open on a windy hill, and let all the feathers fly away into the valley. She did as she was told, and then the sage said, "Now, go and collect every single feather and put them back in the pillow." The woman was shocked and replied, "That is impossible. The wind has carried them into the trees, the rivers, and the far-off fields." "So it is with your words," the sage said with a steady, direct look into her eyes. Once a rumor leaves your mouth, it becomes a physical force in the world that you no longer have the power to control or recall. You can apologize, and you can say you were mistaken, but the ink of a lie is unwashable once it has soaked into the mind of the public. Gossip is the ultimate form of unreal speech. It is cheap to produce, but it costs someone else a price they can never afford to pay. In a world of fast information, the most real thing you can do is to treat your tongue like a loaded weapon. Before you speak about someone who isn't there, imagine that you are spilling a bucket of permanent red dye onto a white carpet. If you wouldn't say it to their face in the middle of a quiet room, don't whisper it in the corner of a loud party. Your words have the power to build a bridge or burn a forest. Choose to be the person who only speaks what is solid and true. A young man named Leo was brilliant, fast-talking, and convinced that he had the answer to every problem in the city. In every meeting, he was the first to speak, often interrupting others before they'd even finished describing the situation. He thought that being the loudest and the fastest made him the most real leader in the room. But Leo's projects kept failing, and he couldn't understand why his great ideas were always causing more trouble than they solved. An old mentor invited him to sit in a quiet garden and told him, "There is a reason why you were given 2 ears but only 1 mouth." The mentor challenged Leo to go to his next 3 meetings and sit in the listener's chair, speaking only in the final 5 minutes. At first, Leo felt like he was suffocating, his mind racing with things he wanted to say to correct and impress everyone. But as he sat in the silence, he began to hear the real problems that were hidden under the surface of the conversation. He heard the fear in his partner's voice, the technical flaw in the plan, and the small detail that he had missed for months. When he finally spoke at the end of the hour, his words were not just noise, they were direct, stable, and exactly what the team needed. The room went silent because his speech now had the weight of understanding rather than the lightness of ego. We live in a culture that rewards the first person to comment, but the most powerful person is often the last person to speak. Listening is the most practical form of research. It is the act of gathering the truth before you try to shape it. If you want your words to have value, you must first pay the price of silence and give others the space to be heard. A wise person doesn't speak because they have to say something, they speak because they have something worth saying. In a grey city where millions of people hurried past each other without a glance, a man named Arthur sat on a park bench. He had just lost his business, his pride was broken, and he felt like an invisible ghost in a world that didn't care if he stayed or left. He was staring at his worn-out shoes, convinced that he was a complete failure with nothing left to offer the world. A woman walking a small dog paused for a moment to adjust her scarf and looked at Arthur's slumped shoulders. She didn't know his name, and she didn't know he was contemplating walking into the river that very night. She simply noticed the way he had helped an elderly person pick up a dropped glove a few minutes earlier. "That was a very kind thing you did," she said with a direct and honest smile before walking away. Those 8 simple words hit Arthur like a bolt of electricity, breaking through the thick fog of his depression. He realized that even in his lowest moment, he still had the power to be useful and to be real to another human being. He stood up, took a deep breath of the cold air, and decided to try one more time to rebuild his life from the ground. We often think that to save someone, we need to give them $1 million or a long, complicated lecture on hope. But the most practical and low-cost form of kindness is a single sentence of sincere, positive feedback. A word of praise is a warmth that can thaw a frozen heart, and it costs the speaker absolutely nothing but a second of attention. In a world that is so quick to criticize and tear down, being the person who notices the good is a radical act of life-saving. You don't need to be a hero to change someone's destiny. You just need to be direct enough to tell them they matter. Never underestimate the weight of a kind word, because it might be the only thing holding someone's world together today. A young manager named Sarah was sitting in a high-pressure board meeting where a major project had just collapsed. The CEO was looking for someone to blame, and it would have been very easy for Sarah to shift the fault to a supplier or a technical glitch. If she told a small lie, she would keep her bonus, protect her reputation, and move on to the next quarter without any trouble. But Sarah looked at the faces around the table and felt a direct and unshakable need to speak the skeleton of truth. She took a breath and said, "It was my mistake. I missed a critical detail in the final review, and I take full responsibility." The room went silent, and for a moment it felt like her career was crumbling into the carpet beneath her feet. She lost her bonus that month, and she had to work twice as hard to fix the mess she had honestly admitted to creating. However, 6 months later, when a massive new opportunity arose, the CEO chose Sarah to lead the entire department. He didn't choose her because she was perfect, but because he knew that her word was made of solid bone and not hollow plastic. He knew that if things went wrong again, Sarah would tell him the real truth immediately, instead of hiding it behind fancy excuses. Honesty is often expensive in the short term, costing you money, pride, or even a temporary position of power. But in the long term, honesty is the most stable investment you can ever make in your professional or personal life. A person who tells the truth when it hurts is someone that people can actually build a future with. You don't need a moral high ground to be honest. You just need to be direct enough to realize that a lie is a debt that always comes due. Trust is the only currency that doesn't lose its value in a crisis, and it is earned by those who refuse to hide the facts. There is a big difference between a person who talks about a plan and a person who presents a result. We are surrounded by language bubbles, people who tell you what they intend to do, what they hope to achieve, and what they plan to start next year. These words are light and airy, floating away like smoke because they aren't tied down to the real earth of action. A closed-loop person is different. They don't use their breath to describe a dream that hasn't happened yet. They stay quiet while they are working, and they only open their mouths when they can say, "It is finished, here is the work." Jesus taught that the tree is known by its fruit, not by the beauty of its leaves or the loudness of its rustling branches. If you say you will call someone, call them. If you say you will finish a task by Friday, have it ready on Thursday night. When you stop talking about your potential and start focusing on your execution, your reputation begins to grow a backbone. The most direct and honest way to live is to shrink the gap between your tongue and your hands until they move as one. Stop wasting your energy on maybe and someday, and start being the person who closes every loop they open. A real person is a simple person, someone whose promises are short and whose results are undeniable. From this day forward, try to be a person of few words and many actions, letting your work speak the loudest. You don't need to announce your arrival to the world. Your consistency will make enough noise on its own. The best way to be heard, in a loud and crowded world, is to be the one who actually does what everyone else is just talking about. Close the loop, finish the job, and let your yes be a solid fact that no one can ever question.